If an advanced civilization once ruled Earth, would we even know? Geology forgets, stone crumbles, oceans rise and swallow everything. Time is not a keeper of memory, but a machine of erasure. It doesn't archive, it devours. But what if we're not the first to ask the stars who we are? What if someone else already did? Long before our cities, our satellites, our signals, before even the continents settled into their current shapes, could another intelligence have risen, flourished and vanished? From unexplained isotopes to extinction-level mysteries, from anomalies in the rocks to stories etched in myth, this is the question science dares to ask, yet may never answer. This is the Silurian Hypothesis, and if it's true, we are not the beginning. The Earth has always been old, but not in a way we can truly grasp. Not in the way that a cracked stone or a forgotten ruin seems old. No, Earth is ancient beyond comprehension. A place that has burned and frozen, drowned and fractured, flourished and died, over and over again. 4.5 billion years of chaotic, spiraling time. To imagine Earth before us is not simply to rewind history. It is to conjure a world so alien, so hostile and alive in ways we no longer recognize, that even its silence feels like it's hiding something. A world that has buried its past deeper than we dare dig. Most of us think of time in centuries, maybe millennia if we're feeling philosophical. But what happens when you stretch your imagination across millions or even hundreds of millions of years? What stories could lie tucked between ancient strata? What empires might have bloomed and burned long before our first ancestor drew breath? This is not a question of fantasy. It is a question of evidence, a challenge to the boundaries of our imagination. Because as strange as it sounds, it is not impossible. In fact, it might be far more likely than we've dared consider. Our story begins not with a discovery, but with a blind spot, a place where science, history, and deep time converge in shadow. The Silurian Hypothesis, as it's known, proposes a haunting possibility, that we, Homo sapiens, are not the first technological civilization to evolve on Earth. That another, or many others, may have come before us. Civilizations not of alien origin but native to this world, born here, grown here, lost here. Coined in 2018 by Gavin Schmidt, director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and astrophysicist Adam Frank, the Silurian Hypothesis was less about proving that such civilizations existed, and more about asking a deceptively simple question. If one had existed millions of years ago, could we even tell? It turns out the answer is more unsettling than expected. Because Earth is not a museum. It is a graveyard in motion, a relentless engine of renewal and destruction. Continents shift, oceans rise, volcanoes erupt. Entire mountain ranges are chewed to dust and swallowed by the sea. Every layer of soil is a palimpsest, overwritten again and again until all but the most stubborn traces are obliterated. Even the footprints of dinosaurs, a species that ruled the Earth for 165 million years, are scarce. Fossils make up a sliver of what once lived, and these were creatures whose legacy spans geological epochs. And now imagine a civilization that lasted just a few 100,000 years, the blink of an eye, geologically speaking. What would remain after 10 million years, 50, 200? Would we even recognize the fingerprints of such a species? Or would they vanish into the same deep silence that now blankets the early Triassic, the Devonian, the Carboniferous? To understand what might have existed, we must first come to terms with just how much of Earth's story has been lost, and how fragile the concept of permanence really is. Take the Sahara Desert, once a lush green savanna, rivers teeming with fish, elephants roaming through forests, not thousands, but just 6,000 years ago. Today, it's a hostile expanse of bone-dry sand stretching for thousands of kilometers. Whatever settlements existed during the so-called African humid period, and there were many, have been swallowed. Now amplify that process across hundreds of millions of years. Volcanism can erase landscapes in a single eruption. Entire continents like Zealandia or Doggerland have been submerged and forgotten. Glacial movements grind civilizations to dust. And plate tectonics don't just rearrange continents, they recycle the crust itself. That's right, the ground you walk on today might have once been the ocean floor of a different age, melted and remade in Earth's molten belly. Civilizations, as we know them, are recent. Our oldest known city, Jericho, is about 11,000 years old. The Great Pyramids, just 4,500. If Homo sapiens were a 24-hour clock, our first written words would appear only in the final seconds before midnight. We are fleeting, and what we build is even more so. So what would it take to wipe away the traces of an advanced society? Not much, it turns out. Given enough time, the Earth cleans house. But here's the twist. The deeper we dig, the more we find anomalies, things that don't quite fit. Unexplained isotope shifts, sudden climate swings, fossils that seem out of place, layers of rock that bear signs of combustion or rapid industrial-scale change long before our kind existed. We explain them, of course. We must. But the question remains, what if some of these explanations are wrong? What if buried in Earth's ancient archives are the echoes of something more? Something intelligent, something forgotten? Imagine a civilization, not human, but with its own evolution. Perhaps reptilian, perhaps warm-blooded. It rose during the Permian or the Devonian or some other forgotten epoch. It learned to shape tools, harness energy, build and create, and perhaps, like us, it overreached. Perhaps it vanished not in cataclysm, but in entropy, the slow unspooling of complexity. Or maybe it transcended. That's the mystery of Earth. It doesn't leave behind books or monuments. It leaves behind patterns, chemistry, dust. And maybe, just maybe, in that dust, the truth is still hiding. In 1970, a man named Stanley Weinbaum published a short story called The Lotus Eaters, in which explorers land on Venus and encounter a sentient plant species, one that left no cities, no buildings, no machines, no artifacts, only stories whispered in the genetic memory of its descendants. The tale wasn't about Venus, it was about Earth, about how intelligence might not leave the kinds of fingerprints we expect. Because when we imagine a civilization, we think of steel and glass, of skyscrapers, satellites, power grids. We imagine machines, engines, cities, roads. But that vision is a projection of us, a carbon copy of our own trajectory, baked into concrete and coded in silicon. So we ask, what if there was another kind of intelligence, one not made in our image, one that didn't leave behind megastructures or that decayed in ways we wouldn't even recognize as artificial? This is the uncomfortable proposition at the heart of the Silurian Hypothesis. Named playfully after the fictional Silurians from the long-running Doctor Who series, intelligent reptilian humanoids said to have ruled Earth before humans, the idea was originally floated not as a conspiracy theory, but as an intellectual exercise in planetary science. In their now famous paper, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank posed the question, would it be possible to detect an industrial civilization in the geological record? Their conclusion? Maybe. But only if you know exactly what to look for, and you're lucky. Let's imagine for a moment. A civilization emerges 250 million years ago in the Permian period. It advances rapidly over a few 100,000 years. It harnesses energy, maybe even fossil fuels. It builds, reshapes its world, dominates ecosystems. Then something changes. Climate shifts, the biosphere collapses, or perhaps they simply disappear, victims of their own success. Fast forward to today. What do we find? Not their bones, not their ruins, but perhaps a sudden spike in carbon isotopes, an unusual sediment layer, a gap in biodiversity, or minerals fused in patterns that don't form naturally. the ghost of an industry no longer present. This is not fantasy, it's geology, and geology is relentless. Take trinitite, a glassy substance formed when the first nuclear bomb test at Trinity site fused desert sand into an artificial crystal. If some future civilization unearthed it millions of years from now, would they recognize it as a technological artifact, or write it off as a strange byproduct of volcanic activity? That's the problem. Time doesn't just erode, it camouflages. The deeper we go, the more indistinct the record becomes. Compression, heat, pressure, all conspire to erase detail. Fossils don't form in most environments, organic materials decay, metals corrode, plastics degrade, especially over millions of years. Even the traces of our own civilization, if left untouched, might be gone within 10 million years. Roads crumble, skyscrapers fall, satellites burn up or crash, microchips dissolve. Our proud monuments, designed to last centuries, are nothing to the ages. The Great Wall of China, dust, the Hoover Dam, pulverized, Mount Rushmore, eroded into faceless stone. What might last? Maybe plastics in the ocean floor, chemical anomalies in the sediment, radioactive signatures from nuclear tests. But even these would be hard to link conclusively to a technological civilization without context. This is what makes the Silurian hypothesis both fascinating and frustrating. It's not trying to prove that an ancient species built pyramids during the Carboniferous. It's saying, we could be wrong about what we're missing. And there are hints, strange ones. Consider the so-called out-of-place artifacts, objects found in sediment layers that seem to defy dating. Most are debunked, hoaxes, misidentifications. But a few linger at the edge of credibility. A machined metal sphere embedded in 2.8 billion-year-old rock, an iron hammerhead fused into ancient strata, the Klerksdorp spheres of South Africa, metallic orbs with precise grooves, allegedly millions of years old. Skeptics are right to dismiss most of these. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But what if the real evidence isn't flashy? What if it's in the soil, not in the museums? Imagine a civilization that used primarily organic materials, plant-derived polymers, biodegradable composites, structures grown instead of built, tools that dissolve when exposed to water and time. What would that look like in the rock record? How could we possibly detect it? We might be staring right at it and not even recognize it as artificial. This is why the Silurian hypothesis matters, because it forces us to ask better questions, to widen the search criteria, to acknowledge that intelligent life may not follow the same path twice, and that our bias toward familiar forms might blind us to alien history written in Earth's bones. Schmidt and Frank weren't alone in pondering this. The idea of prehistoric advanced species has quietly haunted thinkers for decades. Carl Sagan once speculated whether civilizations might rise and fall repeatedly on habitable planets, leaving only subtle thermodynamic fingerprints. Arthur C. Clarke explored the notion of deep time memory encoded in biology. And in speculative biology, artists and scientists alike have imagined what tool-using dinosaurs or aquatic intelligences might have become. Had the asteroid missed, or evolution taken a different turn? It's not about lizard men. It's about humility, about realizing that 99.999% of Earth's history unfolded without us, and that we may be no more permanent than the trilobites, the mammoths, or the ammonites. We walk a narrow ledge above a chasm of forgetting. One strong wind, a solar flare, a supervolcano, a virus, a war, and we fall. And when we do, the Earth waits, patient, impassive, ready to erase as it always has. The stone will remember nothing of our pride, but somewhere in that stone, maybe, just maybe, there's a secret. A fragment, a buried echo, not of aliens, not of gods, but of something like us. Something that walked, wandered, and vanished. Try to imagine a map, not of countries or continents, but of time. A map that stretches from today, not backwards a few thousand years, but hundreds of millions. Each inch not a century, but a million years. The age of the dinosaurs, somewhere far off to the left. The Cambrian explosion, barely visible on the fringe. And us? We'd be a microscopic pinprick on the far right edge. A flash, a whisper. In this scale of time, everything we know, from the birth of agriculture to the launch of Voyager, is little more than the afterimage of a match burned out in the dark. Geologists call this deep time, not merely old, but inconceivably vast. A chronology so immense that it erodes the very concept of history. And in that endless chasm, the Earth forgets. That forgetting is not metaphorical. It's literal. It happens beneath our feet every day. The planet is not a museum. It does not archive. It does not preserve. It does not care. Instead, the Earth is a destroyer of records, relentless, patient, unfeeling. It covers, erodes, crumbles, melts, subducts. Even the crust, that solid stage upon which every drama of life has unfolded, is not permanent. Tectonic plates drift, collide, subduct, and renew. Ocean floors, pushed beneath continents, are swallowed and remade. Mountains rise and are ground to dust. Volcanoes bury everything in an instant, then vanish beneath new landscapes. What is land today was ocean yesterday and desert tomorrow. Rocks don't remember names. Fossils are rarities, flukes of preservation that only form under exceptional conditions: quick burial, mineral saturation, absence of oxygen. Less than 1% of all species that have ever lived left behind a fossil record. Less than 1% of that has been discovered. That's not a gap in science, that's reality. And for anything built by intelligent life, any monuments, tools, or even entire cities, the situation is worse. Far worse. Structures erode quickly without maintenance. Metal rusts, concrete crumbles, glass weathers into grains. In 10,000 years, even the best-built modern city would be barely recognizable. In 1,000,000, it would be gone. In 100 million, obliterated, recycled, subducted. Consider the Atlantic Ocean. It didn't even exist 200 million years ago. The floor beneath it, every ridge, every trench, every sediment, is younger than that. The crust that once held Pangaea has been swallowed. Whatever once existed on those vanished surfaces is gone, crushed and melted in the mantle. The oldest seafloor on Earth is barely 280 million years old. Most is far younger. This is what makes the Silurian Hypothesis so maddening. We ask, if there was an ancient intelligent species, where is the evidence? But the better question might be, how could there possibly be any left to find? Let's turn the lens inward. Imagine a future geologist, 100 million years from now, studying the Earth after humanity is long gone. Civilizations rise and fall, cities crumble, climate warms, oceans swell, new ecosystems form. Perhaps mammals give way to birds, or cephalopods, or something unimaginable. This geologist begins to dig. They uncover a brief chemical anomaly, a thin layer of sediment rich in carbon isotopes, traces of plastic polymers, a spike in extinction rates, a sudden disappearance of megafauna. Maybe they notice a narrow band of radioactive isotopes, fallout from atomic testing, but it's faint and degraded and ambiguous. They speculate. Was this a natural event, a comet impact, a volcanic episode, or something else, but without context, without artifacts, without witnesses? How can they be sure? The trail ends in silence, the story unfinished. This is what deep time amnesia looks like. It's the greatest obstacle to ever truly understanding Earth's past, and it is merciless. Even the bones of dinosaurs, once rulers of the planet, are fossils only in select locations, and often shattered, compressed, incomplete. What then of an intelligent species that did not dominate the globe, but merely carved out a region or era and then vanished? There may have been dozens of such civilizations, hundreds, and they would all be gone. Now layer this geological forgetting with another kind of blindness, confirmation bias. Our tendency to find only what we expect, to explain anomalies within accepted frameworks, to dismiss that which does not fit. If a layer of fused mineral is found in Permian rock, we assume it's volcanic glass. If strange shapes appear in sediment, we label them as natural concretions. If a tool-shaped object is discovered in a coal seam, we assume it was a contaminant, a modern intrusion into ancient material. Science is cautious by design, that is its strength. But in deep time, caution becomes blindness. We don't see what we aren't looking for. And this raises a darker question. If intelligent life did arise before us, if it built, learned, created, and perished, is it not possible that we've already found the clues and buried them again in our refusal to believe? Imagine an ancient city, not built of stone, but coral-like biostructures that disintegrate under air. A power system not based on combustion, but microbial energy, leaving no chemical scars. Transportation not on roads, but across fungal networks or magnetic fields. Communication via bioluminescent sequences or quantum resonance. None of that would fossilize. None would leave behind a structure we'd recognize. And so we build our history atop a silence we do not question. We believe ourselves to be the beginning, but we may only be the latest echo. The Earth does not remember in the way we do. It holds no nostalgia. It does not whisper secrets in our language. It does not store its truths in libraries or scripts. Its memory is layered, compressed, encrypted in stone and heat and entropy. And we are still learning how to read even the simplest sentences in its book. What have we missed? What was here before us? And if it spoke, would we even hear? Or would we cover it again in asphalt and concrete, burying the last trace of a civilization that once was and now once more is not? We often take comfort in bones. In museums behind glass, they whisper stories of ancient creatures. A T-Rex frozen mid-stride, a woolly mammoth weathering an eternal ice age. The fossil record, we believe, is a library of the past, slowly catalogued by Earth itself, waiting for us to read it. But what if it isn't a library? What if it's a graveyard with only a few marked tombstones, and billions lost to erosion, fire, pressure, and time? This is the fossil paradox, the illusion of completeness in a record defined by absence. Let's start with the brutal truth. Fossilization is not normal. It's not even likely. It's rare, freakishly rare. For something to fossilize, a very specific set of conditions must align. The organism must be buried quickly after death, protected from scavengers, weather, and oxygen. There must be the right minerals in the surrounding sediment, no violent geological disruptions for millions of years, no folding, faulting, or melting, and even then, fossilization only preserves parts, bones, shells, teeth, not organs, not skin, not the full pulsing thing that once lived and moved. Now imagine an advanced civilization. Its members wear clothes, they build with synthetic materials, they use plastics, metals, maybe even bioengineered compounds we can't imagine. They don't die in marshes or mudslides. They're cremated, buried in lined coffins, vaporized in disasters, or simply decay like everything else above ground. How many traces of us would fossilize? In the best-case scenario, virtually none. The odds of an individual human becoming a fossil are about 1 in a billion. Most species disappear entirely from the record. Even our greatest cities, without human maintenance, collapse in decades. In 10,000 years, they'd be overgrown and buried. In a million, obliterated. The fossil record does not preserve civilizations. It barely preserves life. And what it does preserve, it does so selectively and ambiguously. There are no fossils of written language, no fossils of culture, no fossils of data or music or emotion. So if we're looking for a previous intelligent species, the fossil record is not our ally, it's our enemy. And yet, might something remain? Is there a chance, however faint, that a footprint of a forgotten people lingers in stone. Let's entertain a scenario. Imagine a species that built low-impact cities using biodegradable materials, carbon-based composites, living tissue architecture, or fungal structures. Imagine if their transportation was based on wind or magnetism or burrowing, leaving no highways or tunnels. Their waste composted, their tools grown, their writing biological, encoded in proteins or spores. What would they leave behind? Nothing, or at least nothing we would recognize as artificial. A coral reef, after all, is a kind of city. A beehive is a structured colony. Termites sculpt intricate mounds with air circulation systems rivaling skyscrapers. But we don't call these civilizations, because they are made by species we don't think of as intelligent. And that bias limits us. We expect civilization to look like ours: rectilinear buildings, electrical grids, combustion residues. But what if an ancient species evolved down a path of biointegration? What if their entire existence was a closed-loop ecosystem leaving no lasting trace? What if they intended not to leave one? It's not impossible, in fact it might be wise, because the more destructive a civilization is, the more trace it leaves, but also the more likely it is to collapse. A paradox: to be seen is to be doomed. To survive long enough to vanish entirely, a species might have to master harmony, not conquest. And so we're faced with a haunting possibility. If a species ever achieved sustainable technological intelligence, mastered matter, energy, and biology, without damaging the Earth, we may never know they existed. They may be invisible to time. Even worse, if some clue was preserved, would we recognize it? Consider this. In 1961, a nuclear explosion in Nevada fused desert sand into glass. A small disk, featureless, inert, buried beneath dust. If unearthed 100 million years from now, would a geologist assume it was made, or natural, or an anomaly, explained away? Now reverse it. If we found a similar glass disk in Permian rock, how would we explain it? Volcanic glass, lightning strike, a freak event. We are brilliant at rationalizing away what we don't expect. The fossil paradox is not just that there's too little preserved, it's that we may have already found fragments of past civilizations and dismissed them as noise. Strange tools in coal seams, geometric formations in deep strata, metallic spheres in ancient mines. All real discoveries, all labeled curiosities, hoaxes, or misidentified minerals. We are conditioned not to see intelligence in the deep past, but perhaps the most chilling aspect of the fossil paradox is that even if we wanted to find a prior species, one like us, we'd still be nearly blind. The deeper you go in time, the fewer sedimentary rocks remain, the more Earth has churned and recycled itself. Of the last 500 million years, less than 15% of Earth's crust still contains sedimentary layers from that period. Most is gone, and what remains is fragmentary. This is why the fossil record often feels like reading a novel with every page but 3 missing. So when we say there's no evidence of past civilizations, we must remember what that means. It means there's no known evidence in the surviving, accessible, and interpretable layers of rock we've studied so far. That's not the same as saying there isn't any. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially in a record where silence is the default. So where does that leave us? Adrift in deep time, searching a shattered mirror for a reflection that may have never looked like us at all. It leaves us humble, or it should. Because we are not the masters of history, we are just the latest sentence in an unfinished book. And the previous chapters may have been erased not out of malice or conspiracy, but by time, water, heat, and indifference. Yet the paradox remains. If we can't see them, these hypothetical precursors, how can we ever be sure they weren't there? Maybe we can't. But perhaps the clues lie not in the bones of ancient beings, but in the chemistry of the Earth itself. Strange spikes, out-of-place elements, chemical whispers of fire, metal, and transformation. That's where we look next. into the soil, into the air, into the scars of the Earth's memory. Where the fingerprints of industry may linger, even if the hands that left them have long since turned to dust. What does civilization smell like? If you could peel back time and take a breath in the middle of the 21st century, what would fill your lungs? Burnt carbon, smog, the sharp tang of ozone, trace metals, synthetic compounds drifting in the atmosphere, invisible molecules carrying the signature of industry, a chemical fingerprint of progress or collapse. If intelligent life existed millions of years ago, they too might have left behind a scent, not in the air, which shifts and erodes, but in the rocks, sediments and isotopes, hidden in the very crust of the Earth. This is the domain of geochemistry, a kind of forensic science for the planet. And if we're looking for the ghosts of ancient civilizations, this is where we must start to dig, quietly, carefully, like archaeologists sifting through ashes for a spark. Because if a pre-human civilization existed, and if it used energy the way we do, burning carbon, mining metals, refining chemicals, then some trace should remain. And perhaps some already has. Let's start with the obvious. What do we leave behind? Carbon dioxide levels, plastics, nitrogen from fertilizers, rare earth elements, isotopic ratios skewed by combustion, artificial radionuclides from nuclear testing, layers of concrete, microbeads, aluminum, refined, shaped, and scattered. We're changing the chemistry of Earth in measurable geologic ways. In fact, we're changing it so fast that many scientists propose we've entered a new epoch, the Anthropocene. But zoom out, way out, 1 million years, 10 million. What survives? Not your smartphone, not your house, not even your bones. But maybe, just maybe, the chemical signature of all the energy you ever used. A burnt offering to time. And here's where it gets interesting. There are already strange chemical anomalies in Earth's deep history. Spikes in carbon isotopes, sudden changes in oxygen levels, unexplained layers of heavy metals, even microscopic spheres that suggest rapid, high-temperature events. Could they be industrial fingerprints? Let's consider one example. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, around 56 million years ago. During this event, global temperatures spiked 5 to 8 degrees Celsius in a geological blink. There was a massive carbon release, ocean acidification, a major disruption in ecosystems. It took over 100,000 years to fully recover. What caused it? Volcanism? Methane release from seafloor clathrates? Or something else? Could this have been the exhaust plume of an earlier civilization burning through its own carbon reserves? It's speculative, yes, but that's the point of the Silurian Hypothesis, to ask uncomfortable questions where comfortable assumptions have settled. Because if we're serious about looking for lost civilizations, we must be willing to entertain the idea that some of Earth's strangest chemical events might not be natural. Another clue comes from plastics. We produce over 400 million tons of plastic per year. These polymers don't decay easily. Some end up in the ocean, some in landfills, some are incinerated. But a surprising amount becomes microplastic, tiny particles drifting through soil, water, and even air. Over time, these could be compacted into sedimentary rock. In fact, geologists have already coined a term for this, plastiglomerate, a mixture of plastic and natural materials like sand or coral fused together by heat. If plastiglomerate is preserved in the geologic record, it could be a future marker of our existence. So ask yourself, what if we found something similar in ancient rocks? Would we even recognize it? Or would we dismiss it again as a natural oddity? Then there's the nuclear question. Nuclear weapons testing in the 20th century created artificial isotopes like plutonium-244 and cesium-137 that don't exist in nature. These isotopes have distinct half-lives. Some will vanish in thousands of years. Others will linger for millions. Now imagine a civilization that used nuclear power or war on a significant scale 100 million years ago. Could traces of their artificial isotopes remain? It turns out we have a real-world analog, the Oklo reactors in Gabon, Africa. Roughly 2 billion years ago, a natural uranium deposit went critical and sustained a chain reaction for hundreds of thousands of years. It left behind a geochemical signature so clear that it was unmistakably nuclear. If nature can do that, so can intelligence. So, if we were to find evidence of a past nuclear age, tiny isotopic shifts in uranium, thorium or cesium concentrations in ancient rocks, it might look just like Oklo. Except, we'd need to ask who lit the match. Even mining activity leaves traces. Concentrated deposits of rare earth elements, tailings of processed metals, unusual concentrations of isotopes due to refining processes. All of this potentially detectable. But here's the rub. Geology is violent. Plate tectonics churn the crust like dough, erosion scours the land, mountain building buries, volcanoes erase. And the ocean floor, the planet's largest archive, recycles itself every 200 million years. That means the surface of the Earth has been entirely replaced at least once since complex life began. And that's the greatest obstacle of all. Even if a civilization burned, mined, refined, and radiated, its signals may now lie fragmented across tectonic plates, or buried beneath kilometers of sediment, or erased entirely. Still, some signals remain. The question is, are they artificial? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We don't have a baseline. We don't know what the chemical signature of a lost civilization would look like, especially if it didn't resemble us. What if they didn't burn fossil fuels but harvested geothermal energy? What if their industry was organic, not metallic? What if their waste products were biodegradable at scales we've never seen? Or worse, what if they cleaned up after themselves? What if, unlike us, they managed their legacy? Then we'd find nothing. Or we'd find only the echoes, the chemical disturbances that don't quite fit, layers of sediment that shift our models, ratios that don't align, data points dismissed because they don't match expectations. We might already be looking at their footprints and calling them geological anomalies. The irony is thick because we too will become a chemical anomaly, a thin black line in the rock, a plastic signature, a spike in carbon, a ghost of electricity and flame. And if we are the first, we'll be the standard by which future archaeologists judge the unknown. But if we are not the first, if someone else once lit the earth with machines and fire, we may be digging through their remains every day and never know it. So we keep searching. In the soil, in the seas, in the isotopes. Not for bones, not for ruins, but for the chemistry of ambition. Because civilization, in the end, may not be measured in monuments, but in molecules. And those molecules might still be whispering. There are scars beneath our feet, not the kind left by war or weather, but scars in the fabric of time itself, etched into ancient rock and buried deep beneath oceans and deserts. These scars tell stories, not in words, but in ratios. Carbon, oxygen, sulfur, traces of ancient atmospheres locked away in stone like a planetary confession. And every now and then, these stories take a sharp turn, a spike, a rupture, a sudden unnatural deviation in carbon levels that doesn't fit the rhythm of Earth's usual dance. We call them carbon isotope excursions, geological events where the ratio between different types of carbon suddenly and dramatically changes. To the trained eye, they look like heart attacks in the geologic record. And like any good detective, you start by asking, what caused this? One of the most famous spikes occurred 56 million years ago during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM. In a matter of thousands of years, barely the blink of a geologic eye, the Earth's temperature surged. Sea levels rose, oceans acidified, entire species migrated, others went extinct, and all of it is recorded in a dramatic shift in carbon-13 to carbon-12 ratios. To a geologist, that ratio tells you how carbon is cycling. A sudden influx of lighter carbon, carbon-12, suggests a massive release of methane or organic carbon. Something burned, or decomposed, or was unleashed from the deep. We blame volcanoes, or methane clathrates, orbital wobbles, and perhaps those are true. But the Silurian hypothesis dares to ask, what if something else caused it? What if 56 million years ago the Earth burned because someone lit the match? If an ancient civilization, fossil fuel-powered, carbon-consuming, industrial in scale, once flourished and fell, then the carbon spike it created might look exactly like what we see at the PETM. Here's the thing. Carbon doesn't come with a signature. It's not stamped with a label that says volcano or factory. But the effects, the warming, the extinctions, the acidification, they look eerily familiar. They look like now, because we too are creating a carbon spike. And when we look back at the PETM, or the Permian-Triassic boundary, or other strange anomalies in the geologic record, we see a chilling symmetry, a rhythm that repeats. The Permian-Triassic extinction, sometimes called the Great Dying, wiped out over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life. It also shows a massive carbon isotope shift, one of the largest in Earth's entire history. Again, we look to volcanoes, the Siberian traps, massive eruptions that darkened the skies and poisoned the seas. But how much of that narrative is certainty? And how much is assumption? Because if we were gone tomorrow, if every human vanished and all our machines fell silent, future civilizations would find a similar spike. They might assume it was volcanic too, but it wouldn't be. It would be us. So the question we must ask is not just what caused these spikes, but are we sure we're interpreting them correctly? What if intelligent life leaves behind only indirect traces, subtle distortions in chemistry rather than towering monuments? Then the carbon spikes might not be a side effect of geology.
They might be epitaphs.
And here's where things get stranger. The PETM wasn't the only spike. There have been many, some lasting thousands of years, others much shorter. The Toarcian oceanic anoxic event, the mid-Cenomanian event, each one showing a burst of warming, extinctions and disrupted carbon cycles. Each one a potential whisper from a vanished civilization. But they're whispers, not shouts. The longer ago they occurred, the quieter they become. Over millions of years, rock layers compress, signals blur, clues erode. What remains are ghost fingerprints, traces without context. Still, the signal is there. A recurring pattern of carbon outbursts, planetary fever, and then silence. Civilization, if it existed, may burn bright, but briefly. And when it collapses, it leaves a signature of fire. The frightening part? We're currently writing our own version of that story. Future geologists, if any survive to study us, will find the same thing. A sharp rise in carbon-12, global temperature spikes, ocean acidification, mass extinction, all happening in real time. They might not know we were here, but they'll know something happened, and they'll wonder, just as we now wonder. Could someone have come before us? And if so, did they burn their world too? But perhaps there's another angle. What if these carbon spikes are not just signs of collapse, but signs of transformation? Moments where the Earth resets itself, sometimes violently, after being pushed too far. Not because life is weak, but because intelligence is unstable. A phase, not a permanence. If so, then maybe civilization always ends in fire, and if that's the case, then every spike is a requiem, a final signal sent not into space, but into time. So what does it mean for us? It means we're not just leaving behind emissions, we're leaving behind a mystery, a test. Will someone else, millions of years from now, read the rocks as we do and wonder if they're looking at ghosts? Will they see the carbon and ask if it came from volcanoes or from hands? And will they find other spikes, deeper, older, with no explanation? We don't know, but the spikes are real. And they are waiting for us to decode them, or to become one. 252 million years ago, Earth came as close as it ever has to becoming a dead planet. It was the end of the Permian period, a time of strange creatures and sprawling ecosystems. Trilobites still scuttled across the ocean floor. Ancient reptiles stalked fern-covered continents. Life had flourished for hundreds of millions of years, evolving into a rich tapestry of complexity. And then, the sky turned dark. The oceans turned to acid, and the land fell silent. This was the Great Dying, the largest extinction event in Earth's entire history. Over 90% of all marine species vanished. On land, nearly 3/4 of all life forms disappeared. Forests collapsed. Coral reefs were obliterated. The planet teetered on the edge of lifelessness. Geologists have long attributed this catastrophe to the Siberian Traps, one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. Massive basalt floods blanketed what is now Siberia. Over a period of 1 million years or more, these eruptions spewed carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane into the atmosphere, driving global temperatures to catastrophic extremes. Acid rain scorched the land, oceans became anoxic, devoid of oxygen, and vast stretches turned into toxic dead zones. It's a compelling theory. But what if it's incomplete? What if the Siberian Traps weren't the cause, but the trigger? The Silurian Hypothesis dares to peer behind the curtain of accepted explanations and ask a forbidden question. What if something intelligent had already pushed Earth to the brink before the lava flowed? After all, our own civilization is capable of releasing massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere at rates faster than any natural process on record. We've done it in just over a century. The Industrial Revolution ignited a furnace that's still burning today, leaving behind a measurable geochemical signature. Now, imagine a similar species, carbon-based, industry-driven, unaware or indifferent to the consequences of its actions, doing the same millions of years earlier. Could their world have teetered into instability, setting the stage for volcanic catastrophe? Here's the strange thing. The carbon isotope data from the Permian-Triassic boundary shows signs of a rapid, massive influx of carbon-12, just like what we see today. A shift so sudden it begs for explanation, and the die-off wasn't slow. In some layers, the extinction appears to have occurred over mere tens of thousands of years, or less. In geological time, that's a lightning strike, an ecological free fall. One hypothesis suggests that methane clathrates, ice-like structures at the bottom of the ocean, were destabilized, releasing vast quantities of methane into the atmosphere. This, combined with CO2 from the Siberian eruptions, created a runaway greenhouse effect. But again, we must ask, did something help push that first domino? Because while nature can be brutal, it is rarely reckless. It operates in cycles, in feedbacks, in checks and balances honed over eons. When Earth tips into chaos, it usually needs a shove. So, what if that shove came from minds? Not like ours, perhaps, not human, but intelligent, tool-using, energy-consuming life that had risen and fallen long before we ever stood upright. And if that's true, then the Great Dying wasn't just an extinction event. It was a reset. A planetary purge of a species that lost control. If they existed, what might they have looked like? That part we can only speculate. Perhaps they were reptilian, arising from early archosaurs. Or perhaps they were marine, building their cities in the deep. Maybe their technologies weren't based on metals and wires, but on organic chemistry, bioengineered structures, or sonic resonance, things that leave no obvious trace. But the effects, the consequences, those we can see. The temperature rise, the collapse of food chains, the loss of biodiversity, the layering of carbon in the rocks. A signal burned into the crust like a funeral pyre. We are now in real time creating a parallel to that ancient moment. Our oceans are warming, species are vanishing. Coral reefs, so crucial to marine ecosystems, are bleaching and dying. CO2 levels have surged past 420 parts per million for the first time in millions of years. If we vanished tomorrow and the Earth healed over our ruins, future scientists would see this spike, this bottleneck, and wonder, what happened here? And if they dared to speculate, they might think, perhaps something intelligent once lived and lost control. That's exactly what we are seeing in the Permian record. It's not proof, but it is symmetry. And nature loves symmetry. It's possible, of course, that it really was just volcanoes, that the Siberian traps were an unlucky roll of the planetary dice, that the biosphere simply couldn't withstand the scale of that eruption. But volcanoes don't explain everything, not the speed, not the severity, not the timing, and certainly not the striking resemblance to the fingerprints we ourselves are leaving today. So maybe, just maybe, the Great Dying wasn't just the end of an age. Maybe it was a warning, written in fire, etched in ash, and left for someone, anyone, willing to read between the layers. Because if we are the first, then this is our only trial. But if we are not the first, then this is our second chance. And we should ask ourselves, what did they do wrong? And are we repeating it? Because the planet always survives. It's civilization that doesn't. What if the apocalypse isn't a bang, but a process? A slow, crumbling descent into silence, a flickering light bulb before the blackout. What if civilizations don't vanish in an instant but disintegrate, pulled apart piece by piece, system by system, until there's nothing left but a whisper beneath the rocks? This is the ghost we fear most, collapse from within. And it might be the one already haunting us. For the Silurian hypothesis to hold weight, we must confront a darker possibility, that intelligence doesn't ensure survival, that the very spark that gives rise to civilization can also be its undoing, that somewhere deep in Earth's past, another species rose, reached, and fell, not because of asteroid or plague, but because their own brilliance outpaced their restraint. There are patterns we know all too well: resource depletion, runaway climate change, technological addiction, fragile global systems that look unbreakable until they break. And maybe they already did. Imagine a civilization built on energy, like ours, not human, not even primate, but perhaps reptilian or avian or something stranger still. Their tools may not have resembled ours, their cities might not have gleamed with glass and steel, but they would have left fingerprints in carbon, in isotope anomalies, in sudden geological shifts. Now picture this, a civilization that burns too fast, that discovers a world of stored sunlight, ancient hydrocarbons trapped beneath rock, and unleashes it. Maybe they didn't call it oil or coal, but they exploited it just the same. And for a while it worked. Their world flourished. Populations soared. Structures rose. The planet bent to their will. They climbed a technological arc that crested high and then wavered. Because with energy comes dependency, and with dependency comes collapse. We know how it might happen. Feedback loops spiral, ice melts, seas rise, crops fail, conflict erupts, infrastructures crack beneath pressure, governments falter, people turn inward, supply chains snap, lights go out, communication ends, and no one is left to keep the fire burning. Sound familiar? We've seen this story in miniature, in empires that fell to overreach, in societies that consumed themselves. Easter Island, the Maya, Mesopotamia, Rome. Their collapses were echoes. What if, long ago, there was a louder version, one that shook the planet? Maybe they left no pyramids because they didn't build with stone. Maybe they left no satellites because they never reached orbit. Or maybe they did, and we simply haven't looked in the right place. Or maybe they did everything we're doing now, including ignoring the signs. Today, our machines hum with invisible electricity. Our data flows in silence. Our systems seem omnipresent, yet they depend on delicate threads: silicon, power, cooperation, stability. Pull one, and the whole thing unravels. A digital civilization is a ghost waiting to happen. Hard drives rot, servers corrode, cables decay, and in 1,000 years no one remembers what the blinking lights meant. In 1,000,000, not even dust remains. So, if an ancient civilization advanced digitally, what would they leave? Maybe not much, maybe nothing, just anomalies, layers of unexplained isotopes, disruptions in ocean chemistry, traces of altered atmosphere, signs that something once pushed the planet out of balance, but left no skeletons to explain how, like a machine that ran too hot and burned itself out. This is the ghost in the machine, the invisible collapse. One that doesn't scream but sighs, and here's the haunting part, we might be living it again. Right now, the Anthropocene is becoming geologically legible. We are leaving behind a planetary fingerprint, plastics in sediments, nitrogen spikes in soil, rare earth metals in concentrations never seen before, technofossils made of alloys nature never forged. In 100 million years, someone, or something, might drill a core sample and find the year 2025 as a sharp line of strange. They might ask, what happened here? Was it natural? Or was it a fall? Maybe they'll theorize, as we do, that intelligence flickered briefly on Earth, once or twice, and extinguished itself before it could stretch to the stars. Maybe civilizations don't die dramatically but fade. First, the infrastructure fails, then the food, then the trust, then the memory, and finally, the silence. The idea isn't new. Philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead once said, "Civilization advances by extending the number of operations we can perform without thinking." But perhaps in that very automation, we lose resilience. We create systems we no longer understand, and when they break, we can't fix them. What if the ancient ones suffered this same fate? What if they built something magnificent, a world of lights and music and mind, and it all depended on a few brittle threads, and when those snapped, their history unraveled with them? It's possible their collapse was gentle, no war, no fire, just dwindling, less food, less light, less hope, until the last city crumbled into forest, until memory became myth, until even myth faded, and the earth turned, uncaring. Now we stand again on the edge. We've built our own machine. It hums and pulses and sings across the globe. But already we see the ghosts, data rot, energy shocks, climate tipping points, fragile supply chains, rising seas, algorithmic chaos. We look around and think, this can't end. But that's what everyone thinks until it does. And that is the final lesson of the Silurian Hypothesis, that civilizations don't just leave ruins, they leave absences, questions, and if we're not careful, we'll leave the same ones. If a civilization falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it leave ruins? This is the question that haunts the Silurian Hypothesis. Not just did it happen, but if it did, why can't we find it? We expect monuments, we search for shattered towers or buried cities. Our imaginations reach for stone, metal, bone, something material, something human. But what if the ruins of a non-human civilization don't look like ours? What if they don't last? The Earth is efficient in its erasure. Cities dissolve, metals corrode, satellites fall, roads vanish, glass turns to dust. Consider how little of our own civilization would remain after just a few million years. A steel bridge might crumble in 500 years. Skyscrapers would be rubble in less. Even concrete, our great permanence, would fracture and fade in under 100,000 years. And beyond that, it's like history dissolves into fog. Now stretch the clock further. 1 million years, 10 million, 100 million. This is the timescale we're dealing with when we talk about the Silurian Hypothesis. Not centuries, not millennia, but geological epochs. Could any evidence survive? Perhaps, but not in ways we're used to looking for. We dig for bones and pottery. We scan for ancient walls and roads. But what if an ancient intelligence didn't build with stone or metal? What if they lived differently, in megastructures grown from biology, or cities shaped from genetically engineered trees, or energy harvested from microbial mats that left no traditional artifact behind. We're biased toward our version of intelligence: tools, fire, architecture. But intelligence isn't a blueprint, it's an adaptation. And evolution doesn't repeat itself with precision. A civilization might have emerged in the Permian or the Devonian that never invented the wheel, but still built wonders. It might have sung through fiber optic vines or written its story in quantum pulses across living organisms. And when it died, nature reclaimed it without a trace. Even our own most enduring creations, digital data, nuclear waste, satellite constellations, have shelf lives. Radiation fades, disks rot, orbits decay. So what would remain truly? Maybe just a layer, a narrow band of sediment touched with rare isotopes or unexplained chemical ratios. A subtle signal, easy to miss. Maybe we've already drilled through it, mistaking it for volcanic ash or oceanic turnover. Maybe we've seen the ruins and didn't recognize them. Because the silence isn't empty, it's filled with assumptions. We assume we'd know an artifact if we saw one. That evidence must be legible. But what if the ruins of an ancient civilization aren't monuments, but puzzles, an unexplained pattern in carbon, a sudden spike in rare earth elements, a gap in fossil records, a zone of chemical disequilibrium that doesn't fit the climate models, ruins hidden in chemistry. Consider the Chicxulub impactor, the asteroid that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. For decades, it was just a theory. The crater itself lay buried beneath the Yucatan. Only a thin layer of iridium across the world hinted at something massive. The evidence was there, we just hadn't learned how to read it. So maybe, just maybe, we're still illiterate to the ruins we need to find. Look at the ocean floor, 70% of the planet, still mostly unexplored. Look at the deserts and jungles hiding buried architecture. Look at the Earth's crust, constantly recycled through plate tectonics. Even the moon, our silent partner, holds secrets in craters we haven't touched. And then there's the other question, the unsettling one. What if the ruins were hidden intentionally? If a civilization knew it was ending, not in a blaze but in a gradual erosion, might they have chosen to vanish quietly, to leave behind no trace, out of shame or humility or a sense of cosmic responsibility? It's not so far-fetched. We've already begun discussions about what messages we should leave behind. Warnings for our nuclear waste. Symbols carved into stone, meant to last 10,000 years. Glyphs designed to be unreadable by accident but clear in intent. Danger, not treasure. If we're thinking about legacy, why wouldn't they? Perhaps they encrypted their ruins, buried them deep, designed them to be undecipherable until a future intelligence proved itself worthy, or avoided their same fate. Or perhaps they chose a more haunting route: total silence. No monuments, no warnings, no trace, a deliberate unmaking. After all, what is history but the stories we choose to tell? If a civilization died knowing its story would be distorted, turned into legend, or worse, justification for violence, maybe they decided not to tell it at all. And yet, silence can be louder than noise. There are gaps in the geological record we can't explain, anomalies that don't align, isotopic signatures that hint at high-energy events without cause, fossils that appear, vanish, reappear. These are not smoking guns, but they are questions, ones that whisper of ghosts, ghosts we may never fully meet. But that doesn't mean they weren't here. It just means the ruins they left behind aren't built for our eyes. They're written in the language of time. If the Earth holds secrets, then the ocean is where it whispers them. Beneath the surface, beneath the silence, beneath even the reach of sunlight, lies a record, not etched in stone or ink, but in layers of sediment, built slowly, like the soft exhalation of time itself. Every grain of silt, every microscopic shell, every fleck of organic decay that falls from the surface becomes part of the seafloor's memory. And yet, this memory is nearly untouched. We've mapped Mars more thoroughly than our own ocean floors. The deepest trenches remain dark to our eyes, the mid-ocean ridges mysterious, and the abyssal plains, vast, flat stretches that make up more than half the Earth's surface, are still largely unexplored. If a previous civilization once lived and died on this planet, the evidence may not lie in deserts or mountaintops. It may lie buried beneath kilometers of water and mud. Because the ocean doesn't forget as easily as the land. While continents shift and erode, oceans preserve. While forests rot and jungles swallow cities, deep-sea sediments settle gently, undisturbed. In some places, the sediment accumulates so slowly, just a few millimeters per 1,000 years, that an undisturbed layer may contain a snapshot of an entire epoch. And within those layers, anomalies hide. Strange shifts in carbon, unusual concentrations of heavy metals, isotopic spikes without volcanic cause. Moments in geological history that seem to shout, but we haven't yet learned the language. For instance, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a sharp global warming event 56 million years ago, left behind chemical fingerprints that still baffle scientists. Gigatons of carbon released into the atmosphere, ocean acidification, extinctions. But no clear cause. Could it have been a natural methane release or something else? What if the ocean floor is hiding the remains of a long-dead civilization? Not buildings, but byproducts. A buried plastic layer, synthetic compounds, radioactive particles, or subtle changes in foraminifera shells caused by an ancient industry. We have drilled only the tiniest fraction of the seafloor. Most of it remains untouched, its secrets wrapped in layers of sediment that may never be disturbed unless we choose to look. Then there are the lost lands. At the edges of the continents lie submerged worlds, continental shelves that once stood above sea level. During past ice ages, when sea levels were lower by as much as 120 meters, these areas were dry land and likely habitable. Sunderland in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in Europe, Beringia between Asia and North America. These were once lush, thriving landscapes, and now they lie beneath the waves, forgotten. Imagine a civilization that arose in one of these places, their cities, farms, tools, all now submerged, entombed in shifting sand and silt. The longer they remain there, the harder they become to find. Not because they don't exist, but because we're not looking in the right places. And even when we do look, we're limited. Water distorts sonar, mud hides structure, pressure crushes probes. The sheer cost and complexity of underwater archaeology make it one of the slowest sciences. And unlike dry land, where we can walk and dig and scan with radar, the ocean floor resists our curiosity. It guards its dead, but sometimes it gives us hints. In 1985, a team studying the seabed near the Azores found what appeared to be rectilinear features, geometric patterns in the sediment, too structured to be natural. They were dismissed as coincidence, but others have reported similar anomalies. Off the coast of India, Japan, and even in the Caribbean, none are confirmed, all are controversial, but the whispers are there. Then there's methane clathrate, a crystalline substance found under ocean sediments. Methane clathrate is a time bomb. When destabilized by warming or disturbance, it can release massive amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Some scientists believe past climate spikes were triggered this way, but what if something else disturbed it? A mining operation? A poorly understood technology? Could a prior civilization have tapped into methane clathrate and unleashed their own demise? If so, would we ever know? The only trace might be chemical. A blip in the sediment, a story in the mud. The ocean remembers everything, but it does not volunteer its memories easily. To access its archive, we need better tools, autonomous submersibles, deep-sea drills, high-resolution sonar, and we need a new mindset, one that accepts the possibility that our own species is not the only story Earth has told. Right now, we read history from dry land, but the true book may lie beneath the waves, where silence is not absence but restraint, where the past is not erased, but buried, and where perhaps another world once rose and fell in blue darkness, leaving only chemical ghosts. Somewhere out there, a machine may still rest, a forgotten artifact, a reservoir of synthetic molecules, a secret too deep for sunlight, too delicate for time, and too alien for us to recognize, unless we ask the right questions in the right place. Because in the ocean's memory, everything is written in pressure and patience, and the tide never forgets. What if the first intelligent civilization on Earth didn't look anything like us? We tend to picture aliens as humanoid, bipedal, upright, roughly symmetrical. When we imagine ancient Earth civilizations, we often do the same. But nature rarely repeats itself so neatly. Evolution is not a blueprint, it's improvisation. And Earth's 4.5 billion year jam session had plenty of time to riff before we ever showed up. If intelligence arose before humans, it may have emerged from forms that no longer exist, creatures shaped by ecosystems long since dismantled, or even realities we can barely imagine. Consider the Devonian period, 400 million years ago. Forests spread for the first time. Giant arthropods roamed the land. The seas were filled with armored fish. What if, in a shallow estuary, a cephalopod developed complex problem-solving? A squid ancestor that learned to build, not cities of stone, but perhaps soft coral pens, kelp enclosures, algae farms. Such a civilization wouldn't leave stone ruins or tools. It might not even leave bones. Now imagine a silicon-based technology, not made of metals and plastics, but of biocrystalline structures, grown, not forged, light-sensitive, self-replicating, biodegradable. A civilization built on photonic logic and neural resonance, thriving for millennia, and then dissolved into the sediment, indistinguishable from nature. Would we recognize such a thing as technology? Or would we dismiss it as a geologic curiosity, a strange crystal formation, a trick of erosion? Let's go deeper. What if the intelligence itself was not localized? We define consciousness in terms of brains, central processors. But what if an ancient life form had distributed cognition, like fungal mycelium, or coral reefs, or slime molds that solve mazes without neurons? Could an entire forest have once thought, slowly, in a language of chemical signals and seasonal rhythms? A global network of sentient organisms, invisible to the naked eye, pulsing with long-wave memory across millions of years. Perhaps this life didn't build machines, it didn't leave monuments, it left balance, harmony with the biosphere, stability in the climate. Its art was the long curve of co-evolution, its ruins were forests and reefs. And then, something changed, a cosmic impact, a shift in temperature, a competing species. And so this civilization, alien, earthborn, non-technological, faded, not in war or flame, but in silence. It was absorbed, decomposed, transformed into soil and seed. There's another possibility, that intelligence evolved deep underground. We think of life as surface-bound, but bacteria thrive miles beneath the crust. Entire biospheres exist in the deep rock aquifers. What if something adapted to the subterranean dark, sensitive to vibration, heat, magnetism? Communicating not with sound, but with pulses of current through conductive minerals. Life forms shaped by the void, using geothermal vents as power, encoded pulses in crystalline lattices. Would they care to explore the surface? Would they even recognize it as habitable? Maybe they lived in silence for hundreds of millions of years, until the crust shifted and their networks were broken. Maybe they still exist, beneath our feet, sleeping in data forms we can't decode. We assume that intelligent life leaves behind great works, cities, satellites, monuments, but this is human projection. Our own short-lived empire of steel and silicon has lasted barely a century. That's a blink in geologic time. Why should others follow the same path? A non-human civilization might have been entirely aquatic. No fire, no metallurgy. Technology developed through sound, pressure, and hydrodynamics. Picture sonar-based engineering. Structures formed by controlled currents. Language encoded in pulses of vibration that traveled for miles underwater. Nothing survives, and yet, perhaps they left behind patterns, harmonic signatures embedded in sediment, strange arrangements of mineral density on the seafloor. The kind of thing we'd never even think to look for. The kind of thing we might already have seen and dismissed. Could intelligence have evolved more than once, in completely unrelated species? The octopus, for example, split from our evolutionary line hundreds of millions of years ago, and yet today it exhibits tool use, play behavior, memory, and even what appears to be problem-solving. It is, in some ways, a thinking alien, already here. What if one of its ancestors went further? What if, before the continents drifted to their current shape, a cephalopod civilization arose deep in a now-vanished ocean? Their knowledge not preserved in books, but in color-shifting skin, generational mimicry and choreography. They built nothing, but they remembered everything. And then came the extinction. It could have been a comet or a methane burst or just time. The currents changed, the reefs collapsed, and the minds faded, until only their echoes remained in instincts and ink. Today we search for signals in the stars. We listen for structured pulses, unnatural wavelengths, signs of intelligence. But what if the signal is already here, buried in Earth's own history, waiting to be heard? Would we even recognize it, or would we walk past it every day, blind in our arrogance, convinced we are the first and the only? The unsettling truth is this: we don't know what ancient intelligence would look like. We don't know where it might arise, how it might act, or what it might leave behind. We only know that nature is vast, evolution is creative, and time is deeper than we can grasp. There may have been minds on this world long before us, minds that dreamed, wondered, and reached, in forms we can barely conceive. Their stories are not written in books or bricks, but in the deep structure of the Earth itself, in the sediment, in the DNA, in the unexplained, waiting. If an ancient civilization once rose on Earth, long before our own, would it have tried to leave something behind? We like to think that knowledge yearns to endure, that if an intelligent species had built, dreamed, calculated, or discovered, it would want others, perhaps future beings, to know. Even if it meant communicating across tens or hundreds of millions of years. And so we ask, could they have left a message? A time capsule? Not just a mark of their presence, but a warning or a gift. The problem, of course, is time itself. Nothing we build today, no monument, no archive, no satellite, is guaranteed to survive the slow crush of geological time. Our strongest alloys would corrode. Our books would decay. Our data centers, buried or not, would be erased by entropy. But what if they knew this? What if a prior civilization, far older and wiser, understood the futility of leaving behind traditional monuments, and instead turned to other means? Imagine knowledge encoded not in stone, but in biology. DNA is nature's storage medium. It compresses extraordinary complexity into just a few molecules. We know today that it can be used to encode arbitrary information, images, audio, even entire books. It is resilient, redundant, and already embedded in life itself. What if a previous species wrote their legacy into the genes of organisms that could survive mass extinctions? Microbes, perhaps, extremophils, bacteria that live in volcanic vents, or spores that can endure cosmic radiation. Life that could drift through catastrophe and still replicate. Would we even recognize that message? Could there be sequences in our own genome, segments labeled as junk DNA, that carry structured, intentional information? Patterns that seem arbitrary, but might be language to another mind. Or perhaps the knowledge was stored in a different kind of code, one not in biology, but in physics. resonance patterns embedded in crystal lattices, neutrino pulses fired into stable orbits, quantum entanglements seeded across deep Earth materials. These sound like science fiction, but they're not beyond theoretical physics. What matters isn't whether we can decode such messages now, but whether someone meant for them to be found. Let's go deeper still. What if the message wasn't passive, waiting in silence, but active? What if the ancient civilization didn't just store information, but engineered systems to awaken under certain conditions? Autonomous programs, self-replicating machines made not of metal, but of biopolymers, dormant until triggered by heat, radiation, or chemical cues. We might call them mimetic seeds, ready to bloom when the world resembled theirs once more. What if they seeded memory into the Earth itself? Picture it. Buried deep within a tectonically stable region far from subduction zones is an inert structure, encoded with knowledge but sealed behind geological thresholds. To reach it requires not just digging but civilization-level intelligence. Once the tools exist to uncover it, the structure activates. The message begins. This isn't mythology, this is strategy, an insurance policy, a final signal from a species aware of how easily time swallows everything. Of course, there's a darker side to this theory. What if the knowledge wasn't meant for us? What if it was meant for them, for a future version of themselves? Consider the idea of directed panspermia, seeding the galaxy with microbial life to ensure survival beyond extinction. A prior civilization might have viewed their presence on Earth as temporary, cyclical, or even experimental. They may have encoded their essence, biological or digital, into the biosphere, awaiting conditions to regenerate. We may not be the inheritors of their knowledge, we may be their reboot, and we may not even know it. Let's return to the surface. Think of the oldest known structures on Earth, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids, Stonehenge. We marvel at their endurance, but they're all under 15,000 years old. A blink, the Earth erases quickly. If you wanted to preserve something across 100 million years, you wouldn't build upward, you'd build downward. Deep caverns, shielded pockets in stable continental cratons, not large but precise, and inside, perhaps not machines but patterns, geometries, encoded logic, maps of thought, a seed library not of plants, but of ideas. Are we looking in the wrong places? Are we so obsessed with monuments and pyramids that we've overlooked subtlety? Maybe the time capsule is already found but misclassified, a geologic oddity, an unexplained formation, a mineral deposit with patterns that don't align with natural processes, a magnetic anomaly beneath Antarctic ice, something strange spotted by satellites, dismissed by the algorithms, stored in forgotten databases. Or maybe it's still out there, and maybe they placed it on the moon. Earth's surface is dynamic, the moon is dead, airless, still and ancient. Anything left there stays. A prior Earth civilization might have seen this clearly and reached for the nearest beacon. If we ever find an artifact in the lunar regolith that predates humanity, even by 1 million years, the implications would ripple across everything. Or perhaps the artifact is us. Maybe we are the capsule, our curiosity, our drive, our questions. Maybe that's the real message, encoded not in metal or code, but in behavior, passed down through countless iterations of life, a reflex toward wonder, a yearning to know, and if so, then asking these questions is itself the answer. We search for signals, but maybe the signal is this moment, the act of looking, the realization that we might not be the first. That knowledge can survive in whispers, in echoes, in dormant seeds waiting for the right minds to awaken them. So we dig, we wonder, we question, and somewhere, maybe, something listens. We gaze into the stars and wonder why they do not gaze back. This is the Fermi paradox, so simple a question, so endlessly unanswered. Where is everyone? With billions of stars in our galaxy alone, many older than our Sun, and a universe teeming with planets, logic suggests we should not be alone. Not by a long shot. Even at a crawl, an advanced civilization could spread across the stars in mere millions of years. So where are they? Maybe we're asking the wrong question, and maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about us. Or rather, those who came before us. What if the great silence isn't out there in the cold void beyond the stars, but behind us, buried in the rock and dust beneath our feet? This is the inversion at the heart of the Silurian Hypothesis. It doesn't ask where extraterrestrial civilizations might be. It asks, what if one was already here? Consider this. If intelligent life arose on Earth tens or even hundreds of millions of years ago, and then vanished, what would remain? And more crucially, would we even recognize the signal? The problem is our assumptions. We expect alien intelligence to look like us, to build as we build, to signal as we signal. We point our antennas to the sky, waiting for radio bursts or megastructures, laser pulses or Dyson swarms. But intelligence might not manifest in skyscrapers or satellites. It might be quieter, stranger. It might leave behind different fingerprints entirely. If a civilization evolved on Earth long before humans, it may have passed through the same bottlenecks we face: energy hunger, environmental instability, rapid technological ascent. It may have made the same missteps, or perhaps different ones. If it learned from those mistakes, if it matured beyond conquest and expansion, it might have chosen not to broadcast itself. Or it might have destroyed itself before it had the chance. So, again, the signal might not be missing, it might be subtle, camouflaged, or simply misinterpreted. Let's return to Earth's layered memory. There are chemical spikes in ancient strata, anomalous isotope ratios, abrupt carbon fluxes, rare elements that suddenly vanish. Geologists have found such signatures, but often attribute them to volcanism, asteroid impacts, or natural methane releases. But what if one of those layers isn't natural? What if buried within that noise is the whisper of something else, a short-lived burst of industrial activity, a civilization that flared, faltered, and faded, leaving behind no towering monuments, but a quiet chemical residue, a ghost in the geologic record? We wouldn't need to see buildings, we wouldn't need bones. All we'd need is a pattern that doesn't belong. But here's the twist. We might have already found it, and we might have looked away. Scientific paradigms are powerful. They define not just what we see, but what we're willing to consider. Proposing an ancient pre-human civilization isn't just radical, it's heretical. It challenges the foundations of archaeology, paleontology, and human exceptionalism. And yet, science should challenge. If evidence exists, even faint, fragmented, or circumstantial, we owe it to ourselves to ask. What if the Fermi paradox has already been answered? What if civilizations do arise, but burn brightly and briefly, leaving behind only scars? Not just across the galaxy, but on their own homeworlds. It reframes the silence. It suggests that intelligence may not be a solution, but a phase, an unstable flash of complexity that nature tolerates only for a moment. And when it ends, the biosphere closes over it like a wound. Time moves on. If that's true, the reason we don't hear others isn't because they never existed, but because they no longer do. Or perhaps the signal is not gone, just hidden. Consider the possibility that a prior civilization reached a level of understanding that made communication unnecessary or even unwise. Perhaps they learned the risks of exposure. Perhaps they encoded their legacy in forms we don't yet understand. Imagine knowledge stored not in data, but in structure, in protein folds, in molecular logic, in repeating ratios embedded in natural formations that we chalk up to coincidence, or in myths. Yes, myths. The oldest stories we carry often describe floods, lost lands, sky gods, cataclysms. They span cultures and continents, Some see metaphor, others see coincidence. But what if they're neither? What if they're noise-filtered echoes of something real? Distorted memory passed from species to species, a signal refracted through countless minds, and we, modern humans, may be the first to hold both the means and the curiosity to decode it. It's possible, then, that the missing signal isn't missing at all. We are standing in it, we are part of it, we just haven't learned how to listen yet. This reframing has consequences, not just for science, but for philosophy. If intelligence is fleeting, if civilizations are short-lived flares in deep time, then what is our purpose, our legacy? What will we leave behind? And if someone does come after us, millions of years from now, what will they find? Will they ask the same questions? Will they see us in the layers, or will we too become part of the silence? Perhaps somewhere in the stars another civilization stares up at their night sky, asking the same thing. Where is everyone? Not realizing that the answer lies below, in the quiet bones of the earth, in the layers of ash and stone, in the stories we tell, and the ones we've forgotten. In the signal we are still learning how to hear. What if civilization isn't the pinnacle of evolution, but a fleeting spark, brief, brilliant, and doomed to fade? From the moment humans began shaping fire, carving stone, and etching symbols into walls, we've imagined ourselves on a linear path, rising from chaos into order, from ignorance to enlightenment. Our cities sprawl like constellations across the planet. Our satellites orbit silently overhead. Our data pulses through glass fibers and through the air. It all feels inevitable, permanent. But the universe has no obligation to preserve what we build, and perhaps it rarely does. Civilization, as we understand it, technology, agriculture, social complexity, is barely 12,000 years old. That's not even a blink in geological time. It's the last flicker of the last second of the last minute in a 24-hour planetary clock. The dinosaurs ruled for over 160 million years. Stromatolites, living rock-like microbial mats, have existed for billions. In contrast, our entire recorded history could be scrawled on a single page of Earth's diary, and the deeper truth is this: complexity doesn't guarantee longevity. It may even guarantee collapse. Because civilization, for all its wonders, is built on balance. Food supply, climate, energy, ecology, memory, all delicately interlinked, each part leaning on the next, each one vulnerable. Tilt the balance too far in any direction and the whole structure teeters. We know this instinctively. History is a litany of rise and fall. Sumeria, Egypt, Maya, Rome. Civilizations have always come and gone, but we convince ourselves that this time is different, that we are different, that globalism, technology, and science make us immune. But what if we're not? What if civilization is not a staircase but a wave? It rises and falls. And if that's true, then intelligence itself may be transient, not because it's rare, but because it is self-limiting. Think of it like fire. Fire spreads because it consumes. Civilization does the same. It devours resources, transforms landscapes, alters climates, and eventually it reaches a boundary, a point where the system cannot absorb the change. Collapse becomes not a possibility but an inevitability. And what remains? Ash, silence, and perhaps traces buried in rock. The Silurian Hypothesis proposes not just that ancient civilizations could have existed, but that they might have followed the same arc. Brief ascents, sudden collapses, each one isolated in deep time, each one blind to the others, no continuity, no grand narrative, just echoes. In this framing, the universe isn't a stage for immortal empires, but a garden of mayflies. Civilizations bloom, shimmer, and vanish, leaving only questions behind. And yet, the story doesn't have to be tragic, because in recognizing civilization as a phase, we also recognize its fragility and its power. We understand that intelligence is not invincibility, it is responsibility. We are not passengers on this ark. We are its architects. If we are a phase, perhaps we can stretch that phase, extend its curve, delay its fall, maybe even rewrite the pattern. But to do that, we must listen to the layers of stone, to the echoes of collapses past, to the warnings embedded in myth and isotope and silence. We must ask, what were their mistakes? Did they alter their climate, burn too fast through their energy, push their ecosystems past the edge, fail to cooperate, or simply fail to see the wall until it was too late? The answers may be inaccessible, or worse, they may be visible but ignored, because the tragedy isn't that civilizations fall. It's that they fall the same way, again and again. And so we stand on a precipice. Our technologies have given us power over the earth and over each other, but not necessarily power over ourselves. We wage war with the tools of gods. We sculpt the climate with our exhaust. We spin entire economies around infinite growth on a finite planet. And we still look up at the stars wondering why they are silent. Perhaps they are not silent. Perhaps they are gone, burned out, collapsed, buried beneath their own ruins, and perhaps we are next. But here's the opportunity, our fragile moment of choice. Because even if civilization is a phase, phases can last. Fire can warm instead of devour. Growth can transform instead of destroy. It requires restraint, foresight, a willingness to learn not just from our ancestors but from those we never knew, those we imagine, those we suspect, those we might have been. The Silurian Hypothesis isn't just a mystery, it's a mirror. It asks, if intelligent life arose before, what happened to it? And then it turns that question on us. What will happen to us? We have a chance they may not have had. We know what fossil fuels do to the atmosphere. We understand feedback loops, extinction curves, runaway systems. We've been warned by the very signals they may have left behind, chemical echoes, isotope ghosts, mythic firestorms. If civilization is a match, it is lit now. How we burn it is up to us. So perhaps we are not a phase after all. Perhaps we are the turning point. Or perhaps we are merely the next in a long line of forgotten flames, soon to be buried, soon to be silent, soon to be someone else's mystery. Imagine a child on the shore. The tide is out, the sand is wet, and they begin to build. Towers rise, walls are shaped. They pat it smooth with their hands, proud, careful, precise. But before long, the ocean returns. The waves don't care. The towers melt, the trenches fill, and all of it vanishes back into the sea, as if it were never there. Now imagine our entire civilization as that sandcastle. It's an unsettling metaphor, but perhaps it's the most honest one. Because no matter how advanced we become, how many cities we build, satellites we launch, or data we store, we are not immune to time. We are not immune to nature. Entropy does not negotiate. And the Earth is not a museum. It is a living, heaving, restless world. It buries, it burns, it forgets. This is the sandcastle principle. It states that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it cannot fully resist the forces of time, geology, and entropy. That everything we build is by default temporary, even if it feels immortal. Steel rusts, data degrades, stone erodes. Even the most resilient materials eventually yield to pressure, heat, water, and time. Glass turns back to sand. Concrete crumbles to dust. Skyscrapers, highways, and even nuclear reactors, all of it will be gone, given enough time. But this principle isn't just about physical decay, it's about memory. Because the sandcastle vanishes not only from sight, it vanishes from mind. No one remembers where it was. No one knows what shape it took. If another child comes along hours later, they may not even realize anything had been built there at all. Civilization faces the same fate. Not only can our structures disappear, but the knowledge of them can vanish too. Records are lost, languages die, data formats become unreadable, libraries burn, histories are rewritten or simply forgotten. What then would remain of us? Perhaps the occasional anomaly, a layer in the sediment, a spike in carbon isotopes, a buried landfill. But these are shadows, not structures, hints, not legacies. And even those may be misinterpreted or dismissed entirely. So when we ask whether previous civilizations could have existed, we must stop imagining colosseums or pyramids. We must think more like archaeologists or geologists. We must accept that if anything remains, it will be deeply fragmented, and what we call absence may simply be erasure. Think of Earth as a recycling system. The crust is constantly reshaped. Mountains rise and are ground to gravel. Oceans advance and retreat. Forests become deserts. Continents break and reassemble. And anything built atop them, no matter how mighty, is vulnerable to being swallowed. Even in the modern day, we can see it happening. Entire cities have disappeared in a century. Roads overtaken by vines, satellites crashing into the sea. Climate change threatens coastal metropolises that once felt eternal, and all of this within mere decades. Now stretch that to millions of years. It's not hard to imagine how a civilization could vanish entirely. But there's a deeper implication. Because if we could be so easily erased, then we must confront the possibility that others already were. That civilizations born before us lived their arc, built their towers, and then were swept away. Their sandcastles undone by tides we never saw. And here's the most haunting truth. We may not know how many there were. 1, several, 100 across epochs. The geological record is spotty at best. The older the layer, the less survives. And even if a structure or artifact were perfectly preserved, it might lie miles beneath the surface, unreachable without knowing exactly where and why to look. In this way, the sandcastle principle becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a warning, a reality check, a sobering lens through which to view our place on this planet. Because it asks us, what are we building? And more importantly, will it last? Will anything we make survive not just war and weather and time, but forgetfulness? Will any trace remain after the tide returns? The truth is, most of what we build is designed for the now. Efficiency, growth, speed, profit. We construct with plastic, not permanence. We store knowledge in cloud servers, not stone tablets. We bury waste, but not wisdom. And even our attempts at longevity, time capsules, monuments, digital backups, are hilariously fragile when measured against the Earth's vast clock. If we wanted to be remembered, we would need to think not in years, but in eras. And yet, maybe we don't want to be remembered. Maybe part of us believes that forgetting is mercy. That if we collapse, if we vanish, it is better no one knows. But the sandcastle principle doesn't care about our intentions. It only describes what is. And what is that nothing built on shifting sand can last forever. So what's the takeaway? It's not despair, it's awareness. We must design, think, and live with impermanence in mind, not to avoid collapse entirely, perhaps that's impossible, but to leave behind meaning rather than just material, to seed the future, if not with buildings, then with questions, with echoes, with something that might endure, even if only as myth, mystery, or metaphor. Because somewhere down the line, a new intelligence may rise, and like us, they may search the sands, and maybe, just maybe, they'll find a tower, not a real one, not intact, but a glimmer, a pattern, a strange anomaly that whispers, someone was here before you. That is what the sandcastle principle asks of us, not to resist the tide, but to leave a ripple behind. Beneath your feet, as you walk your neighborhood, beneath the forests, fields, and parking lots, lies a history you'll never see, not ancient bones, not buried treasure, but something more elusive, possibility. The Earth is not just a stage for life, it is a vault, a massive, shifting, encrypted archive of everything that has ever happened here. And like any archive, most of it is locked away, some of it is decayed, and nearly all of it is out of reach, We tend to imagine our past as neatly laid out: prehistory, then us. But dig even a little deeper, both literally and conceptually, and the layers start to blur. It becomes clear that we've only read the surface of a vast and ancient book, a few dog-eared pages on the top, while the rest remains sealed in stone. This brings us to a provocative idea. What if, hidden just below the crust of familiarity, there are pieces of a story we haven't been told? Not because it's forbidden, but because it's buried, beneath convention, beneath assumption, beneath hundreds of feet of dirt. Because if a prior intelligent civilization had existed millions of years ago, it wouldn't just be the vastness of time working against their memory, it would be us, our blind spots, our biases, our failure to look in the right places. Consider how we explore the past. We dig where we expect to find things: known archaeological sites, old cities, human remains. But what if the most important evidence doesn't lie beneath ancient Mesopotamia, but deep in the Australian outback, or at the bottom of sediment layers in forgotten swamps, or in core samples dismissed as unremarkable because they don't match known cultural markers? What if we've already unearthed fragments, strange alloys, inexplicable structures, fossilized patterns, and simply filed them away as anomalies, outliers, or natural oddities? The truth is, the Earth's surface is constantly changing, but the vast majority of it has never been seriously examined, not even by geologists, let alone archaeologists. Only about 5% of the ocean floor has been mapped in detail. That's more than 70% of our planet remaining, in essence, unread. Even on land, many remote regions have never been excavated. And when they are, the investigations are often driven by assumptions, looking for human artifacts, human bones, human stories. We may be searching for ourselves when we should be looking for something other, something we wouldn't immediately recognize. A prior civilization may not have used metal tools. Their structures might not have followed our architecture. Their technology might not have left wires, chips, or screens. Perhaps their computing was biochemical, their construction organic, their cities decentralized, grown rather than built. If we dig expecting pyramids, we will miss the petrified forest that was once a data center. And here's where it gets more intriguing. Geological core samples taken from various parts of the world sometimes show strange anomalies: unusual isotope ratios, microscopic spheres, layers rich in certain metals. Some of these have been attributed to asteroid impacts or volcanic activity, but others remain unexplained. In 2018, for example, a team at the University of Rochester examined a thin layer of sediment from the mid-Paleocene, roughly 56 million years ago. In it, they found traces of platinum group elements, rare earth concentrations, and a temperature spike consistent with massive industrial-scale carbon emissions. Officially, the explanation remains uncertain. Volcanism is the safe bet. But what if it wasn't? What if that layer is a footprint, not of a natural disaster, but of a technological one? That leads us to a haunting thought. If someone was here before us, we may already be standing on their ruins. Just not in the way we expect. Not cities of marble or chrome, but layers in the soil, dust between fossils, altered strata that no one thought to question. Imagine a city, not New York or Tokyo, but some lost metropolis from a forgotten epoch, being swallowed by the earth. Over tens of millions of years, its buildings crushed into sediment, its streets replaced by stone, its infrastructure fossilized not in shape, but in trace elements. And now, above that, a forest grows, a road is paved, children play, unaware that beneath them is not just earth, but memory. Memory written in the language of chemistry, pressure, and decay. It is possible that we've mistaken remnants of an earlier civilization for natural mineral formations, or written them off as geological curiosities. We may have even drilled into the heart of some ancient reactor and chalked it up to unusual rock chemistry. And who could blame us? Our entire scientific method is built on precedent, on patterns. But when something doesn't fit, truly doesn't fit, we often don't dig deeper. We label it anomalous and move on. But science, real science, thrives on anomalies. It's the outliers that lead us forward if we're willing to look again. So what should we do? Perhaps we start by re-examining the archive, by looking at old samples with new eyes, by developing detection techniques not just for bones and pottery, but for advanced industrial residues, rare isotopic decay, and entropy-resistant compounds. We should be looking for data corruption in stone, digital shadows fossilized in atomic lattices. We should be listening for silence where noise should be, because sometimes the absence of expected natural markers could signal an unnatural history. And we must question what we think we know about our own uniqueness, because this planet is old, far older than us, and we are not the first to wonder what came before. The archive is there, buried, fractured, forgotten, waiting. The only question is, will we ever learn how to read it? Not all archives are buried in stone. Some are whispered from mouth to mouth, reshaped by firelight, bent by fear, softened by hope. Some memories survive not in ruins or fossils, but in myths. And myths, as we've long known, are dangerous things. They blur the line between history and imagination. But what if some of them are neither invention nor coincidence? What if they are echoes? Let's begin with a question that sounds almost childish in its simplicity. Why do so many ancient cultures from opposite ends of the earth tell the same kinds of stories? Floods, great floods, civilizations drowning beneath angry oceans, gods punishing hubris, knowledge lost beneath the waves, survivors clinging to mountaintops, the end of one world, the beginning of another. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, to the tale of Manu in Hindu scriptures, to Plato's Atlantis, to the Hopi's story of past worlds washed away, to Noah's Ark. The pattern is astonishing, and not just in content, but in tone. These myths don't speak of metaphorical cleansing. They speak of cataclysm, real destruction, a memory too vast, too painful to be stored anywhere else but in story. Some scholars argue that these tales arose independently from real localized floods, rivers that overflowed, tsunamis that struck, coasts that eroded. But that doesn't fully explain the uncanny resonance nor the recurring symbols. Sacred mountains, chosen survivors, forbidden knowledge. Carl Jung once called myths the collective dreams of mankind. But what if they're more than dreams? What if they're data compression? Imagine this: a civilization faces collapse. Its knowledge is vast, but its infrastructure is crumbling. Satellites are falling, power grids are dying, cloud servers are silent. It cannot preserve itself with technology, but it has something older, something hardwired: language, storytelling, archetypes. So it embeds warnings and knowledge into tales, into metaphor, into gods and monsters, destined heroes and fallen empires. It tells its children stories designed to be remembered, passed down, reframed over generations, until the details fade, but the bones of the truth remain. What would those myths look like to us today? They would look exactly like the stories we dismiss as fiction, as folklore, as cultural coincidence. But what if Atlantis wasn't just a philosophical allegory from Plato's imagination? He claimed to have heard it from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests, who described a powerful civilization destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune, swallowed by the sea. Scholars say Plato invented it, but others, including later thinkers like Ignatius Donnelly and Graham Hancock, suggest there may have been kernels of forgotten history in the tale. What if the myth of the Tower of Babel, humanity reaching too far, trying to touch the heavens, only to be scattered and confused, was a symbolic recollection of technological overreach, a civilization undone by its own ambition? What if the gods, descending from the sky in flaming chariots, were not divine at all, but misremembered aircraft, drones, satellites, seen and retold by those who came long after? And what of the 7 suns in Mesoamerican myth, where previous worlds ended in fire, floods, wind, and jaguars? Were these simply metaphors for natural cycles, or shadows of ancient collapses? Even the Greek concept of cyclical ages, the Golden Age, silver, bronze, and finally iron, speaks of decline, loss, forgetting. Almost as if we've been through this before, as if Earth has witnessed not one but many rises and falls, each time a flame lit, each time it burned bright, each time it flickered and died, leaving behind only smoke and story. There's something elegant, almost poetic, in the idea that the last will of a dying civilization wasn't a monument or satellite, but a myth. A story capable of surviving the death of languages, the erasure of cities, even the turning of continents. And perhaps we've misunderstood myth's purpose all along. It's not meant to be believed literally. It's meant to resonate, to sneak truth into memory through rhythm, repetition, and awe. Like a virus of meaning. And so we must ask, if such messages exist, how would we recognize them? We'd look for thematic consistency across cultures. We'd look for symbolism that maps eerily onto scientific understanding they shouldn't have had. We'd look for mathematical structures embedded in stories, myths that align with astronomical data, or knowledge encoded in architecture and oral tradition. We'd look at Göbekli Tepe, a 12,000-year-old megalithic site in Turkey, which predates agriculture and challenges everything we thought we knew about early humans. It was deliberately buried, as if to preserve it, by people who shouldn't have had the tools to build it in the first place. We'd revisit the flood myths with a geological eye. Around 11,000 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas period, Earth experienced abrupt climate shifts and sea level rise. Massive glacial lakes discharged into the oceans, causing rapid inundation of coastal areas. Coincidence? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Perhaps these global myths are our first breadcrumbs. Perhaps we've been walking through a hall of echoes, hearing the muffled warnings of our ancestors and mistaking them for bedtime stories. And perhaps the very act of dismissing myth is itself a kind of forgetting. One more layer of amnesia atop 1,000 already in place. In a world obsessed with data, with evidence, with proof, we forget that memory doesn't always wear a lab coat. Sometimes memory wears feathers, paints its face, tells stories to children. And if we ignore it, if we fail to see what's hidden beneath the metaphors, we risk making the same mistakes, again and again. Because myth is not just fantasy. It is what survives when everything else is gone. History doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And sometimes it whispers. Not from the pages of textbooks, but from the ground beneath our feet, from the long, silent record of extinction. We know the story well, or at least we think we do. A planet in peril, species disappearing, forests shrinking, oceans rising. We trace the arc of our modern world with grim familiarity. The graphs trend upward, the warnings grow louder, and the horizon narrows. But what if we're not the first to reach this cliff's edge? What if our acceleration, our heat, our hunger, our hum of machines, is not unique in Earth's deep history? What if another hand once gripped the same lever and let it slip? The Silurian Hypothesis asks whether an industrial civilization could have existed millions of years before us and disappeared without leaving behind the usual fingerprints of concrete, steel, or plastic. In this part, we ask a more haunting question. Are we following the same path they once walked? To explore this, we must hold up a mirror, not just to ourselves, but to the planet. Consider the Permian-Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago, the Great Dying. Over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species vanished in a geological blink. For decades, the cause was assumed to be massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. But recent analyses show a puzzling acceleration, as if something intensified the process beyond nature's typical pace. Carbon isotope records from that time display a rapid, sustained spike, the same kind we're now creating through fossil fuel combustion. Coincidence? Maybe. But perhaps it's more chilling than that. Perhaps we're reactivating the same trigger they once pulled. The Anthropocene, our current epoch, is defined by human fingerprints in geology, plastic in ocean sediments, radionuclides from nuclear tests, an unnatural ratio of nitrogen and phosphorus in soils from agriculture, and a spike in carbon levels. These are called technosignatures, and they don't vanish quickly. A civilization like ours will leave traces for hundreds of thousands of years. But millions, that's where the sediment settles and forgets. So what would the end of a civilization like ours look like? Not in books or battles, but in silence. First, the cities stall, lights flicker out, supply chains fracture, ecosystems collapse under the pressure, fires rage, then comes the flood, literal and metaphorical. We are told that nature is resilient, and it is. But recovery is not the same as forgiveness. The earth forgets slowly, and it never forgets everything. We already see echoes of collapse in slow motion, insect populations vanishing, coral reefs bleaching into ghost towns, the Arctic losing its memory of winter. These are not normal fluctuations. They are the quiet rumble before the avalanche. And yet we persist, not just in action but in narrative. We tell ourselves we are different, smarter, wiser, more advanced, but so might they have. If an ancient civilization once burned through the same fuels, destabilized the same climate systems, extracted until the ground bled, they may have thought themselves masters of nature too. And maybe like us, they had their Cassandras, voices warning of the fall. Maybe they published papers, built models, gave speeches. Maybe they too held summits and made promises that never reached the soil. In the end, collapse doesn't always come as thunder. Sometimes it arrives as quiet erosion, the slow unraveling of complexity. And civilizations, no matter how advanced, are fragile when built on unstable foundations. This is the mirror of extinction, the reflection that doesn't flatter. Because when we stare into it, we don't see mystery, we see familiarity, we see ourselves. And that's the true terror, that our trajectory isn't unprecedented, it's archetypal. That civilization is not a permanent state, but a recurring phase, a chemical reaction that burns hot and bright and then stops. We can imagine ancient hands typing equations, drawing power from the deep earth, dreaming of stars. We can imagine their stories, their art, their children. And we can imagine them watching it all fall apart. Too late to stop it, too certain to see it coming. This is not prophecy, it's pattern recognition. Because if we are not the first, we may not be the last. And what we leave behind, or fail to leave, may determine whether the next ones even know we existed. Perhaps that's the final irony. That a species capable of changing the atmosphere, rearranging the continents and launching machines into the void, may be forgotten not because of failure but because of success followed by silence. A brief flash in time like lightning, brilliant, terrifying and gone. So now we must ask, if we saw the signs in our own fossil record, massive extinction, carbon spikes, buried artifacts, would we believe the civilization that caused it ever existed? And if we wouldn't believe in them, why would anyone believe in us? If we vanish, who comes next? That's the question that lingers, not in fear, but in curiosity. In deep time, extinction is common, persistence is rare, and civilization may be just a brief flare, a spark on a dark timeline. But sparks can light fires. Let's imagine a future not of our making. Tens of millions of years from now, Earth spins on, older but not empty. The continents have shifted, mountains once young have crumbled, our cities swallowed by jungles, oceans, ice, our satellites long since tumbled into decay, no more than dust dancing in the magnetosphere. And yet, something stirs again. Not us, something else. Evolution never rests. In forgotten valleys, deep oceans, or the shattered fragments of ecosystems we once ruled, life endures. And over unthinkable spans of time, it adapts, it changes, it tries something new. Maybe it's born of birds or rodents or cephalopods. Maybe it stands upright, maybe it doesn't. It may never look to the stars, but it may look to the past. And when it does, what will it find? It will dig, it will study, it will probe the crust for clues as we do, and it will discover anomalies, thin, dark lines rich in carbon, layers of microplastics, sudden disappearances of flora and fauna, unexplainable shifts in climate over a few thousand years. It will find a signal, but not a message. It may not know us by name. Our stories, our languages, our art may be gone or incomprehensible, but it will know that something came before, something vast, something capable of reshaping a planet and then leaving it in silence. And perhaps they'll wonder, were we gods? Were we myths? Were we warnings? In their myths, we may appear as sky beings or fire makers, dreamt up in origin tales to explain a strange stratum of the earth. Our machines, now oxidized fragments, may be seen as natural formations or divine relics. Our brief burst of heat, radiation, and complexity may resemble a cosmic fever that the planet finally healed from. And maybe, just maybe, they'll recognize a shadow of themselves in us, because the drive to know, to build, to transform, that's not human, that's intelligence. And intelligence, like water, finds its own path through time. But will they repeat our mistakes? Will they too mine too deep, burn too hot, accelerate too fast? Or will they do what we couldn't, learn from ghosts? This is the final arc of the Silurian Hypothesis, not just that we might not be the first, but that we might not be the last. That the cycle of rise and fall may be less like a tragedy and more like a baton pass in the grand relay of sentience. And perhaps, unlike us, they will leave behind not just footprints, but wisdom. Perhaps they will uncover our story, coded in stone, preserved in DNA, or etched into the crust of the world, and they will understand. Understand not just what we did, but why we fell. And maybe, just maybe, they will look at our ruins not as cautionary tales, but as cosmic inheritance. Because if we can imagine them, they can imagine us. And if we vanish without a whisper, without a legacy, then we are truly extinct. But if we vanish and still guide those who come next, then in some way we endure. The earth is not just a cradle, it is a crucible. And though the fire of our civilization may flicker out, the embers may still smolder beneath the surface, in the fossil record, in the memory of the soil itself, waiting to be found, waiting to remind, waiting for the next ones. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the universe here on Frontiers of Infinity. If this glimpse into the unknown has sparked your curiosity, be sure to subscribe and join us each Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, where we unravel the darkest mysteries of space.